All right, everybody. Welcome to our usual Patristic Faith discussion and Q&A stream. You can bring your questions. Let's see if we have any super chats. We appreciate your support. If you haven't liked or subscribed to this channel, please do. If you haven't liked the stream, please give a like there. Trying to find some news to cover. All right, 1 second. We're talking about a message. They're doing the street sweep or something in the parking lot, and they wrote a message that people had moved their cars. Let me just see. Give me 1 second. I want to make sure that. Alright, I was just double checking. They're doing like, I don't know, like street pavement or something. In two days, so like certain areas, and they're saying if cars aren't moved by 10:30, they're gonna tow. The area that I'm parked in is until tomorrow, so but you get these things and then you start getting paranoid and you forget, like, did I park in the right spot yesterday? Good question. How do you be encouraging and uplifting to the clergy who serve you? Of course, number one, prayers. I think you'd never hear it from any clergy, but I think that letting them know from time to time that you're grateful for their service, and that, you know, just offering your service in various ways, whether it's coffee hour, cleaning, or volunteering for certain stuff at the parish, are ways of, you know, appreciating your priest and giving them encouragement. And yeah, great question. All right, what else is going on? Then we need to cover. That's a funny. Woman came into stop me if you heard this one. Woman came to confession and spent the entire session gripping about her husband's shortcomings. At the end, the priest told her, "Send up your husband for absolution since you have confessed all his sins. When you're ready to confess your sins, I'll absolve you." Dang. All right, more jokes. More theology jokes. Ready? laughed so hard at joke. Did I tell you about the one that I saw the other day on Jim Bob's stream? Where is everybody? Oh. It has this unlisted. What in the world? How did this happen? No wonder. Oh my goodness. What? So, Lord have mercy. All right, let's see if I can make this public. I have no idea how that happened. That makes so much sense. Well, the morning prayers were public. We didn't have that many. Okay, I fixed it. I don't know how that got set to. I was like 7, 8. It's all good. Let me reboot this. Yeah, this is public now. Good that you got notified. That was another thing, is people weren't getting notifications. And then somebody mentioned something about YouTube only has it that your first, I don't know how many, have notifications. And you'd have to unsubscribe and then resubscribe. I remember somebody saying something. I haven't fiddled with it. All right, here we go. Piling in. All right, let's go back to. And maybe I'll just pull up the Bible verse. See, there's another verse I want to. I've been thinking about, you know how St. Paul talks about people who read scripture to their own destruction. And the worst of it seems to be kind of evangelical, non-denominational Protestants. And I was thinking the other day, I'm like, it would be better if they never read the Bible. That sounds pretty harsh, but I think it was St. Peter. 2 Peter 2:21 says, it would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than have them to know and then turn their backs against the sacred commands. It talks also, St. Paul talks also about the law is condemnation to those that hear it. And I feel like Scripture is the same way. If you twist Scripture to your own destruction, now you're accountable. You read it. And it would be better that you didn't. And so let's go over, but evangelicals really have they just take the worst interpretations. One thing that I noticed, the fallacy of taking things out of context, which is the fallacy of contextonomy. They're notorious for this. Also, the fallacy of accident, that, well, let's take a perfect example of iconoclasts. The Bible says not to make images. Now, first of all, that's totally taken. That's not even what it says. It says graven images. Let's actually read the verse. The second commandment. So it's, they read in their own stuff and they actually take out. Now, I was talking to my subdeacon this Sunday coming back from liturgy that in Revelation it says if anybody adds or takes away to this book, right, the Revelation, but the principle, then it would be taken away, from him as well, or her, in terms of salvation in their soul, that isn't, it's not just referring to the canon, misinterpreting scripture is adding or taking away. Perfect example, Exodus 24. What do iconoclasts? You're not supposed to have any images whatsoever. Well, you just took away, that's not what it says. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Engraving is like a statue. Now, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I'll continue my thought after I finish the rest of this. Or any likeness to anything in heaven above that is on earth beneath. What is the context of this? That the Lord God brought the Hebrew people out of the land of Egypt. The land of Egypt is captivity. Captivity to idolatry. Because verse 3 says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So it should be really clear. It's like, for like a lot of Protestants, there's no reason why God's like a capricious and arbitrary God. Well, God said it. It doesn't have to be a reason. So you ask, well, like, what's intrinsically wrong with images? God said it. That's all I needed. Like, what a stupid. It's not. If you can answer that question, you'll start to realize the nuances of scripture. They'll be like, okay, it's not what I thought. Now, what helps is the context. What were the Israelites doing? They were making three-dimensional images, i.e. graven. That's what graven means, i.e. engraved. Bow and the golden calf, and worshiping them. What's worship? Treating something. So worship's not simply an outward action. It has intention. Otherwise, doing stretches would constitute as an act of where, oh, he's bowing down. I can't believe the guy's stretching before he goes for a run. What an idolater. No. The mental and spiritual intention of the object of intention that you're doing, if you're treating something or thinking about something in your mind and heart as a created object, as if it were uncreated God, that is idolatry. So most iconoclasts can't even tell you what idolatry is. Now, what's the context of going on again with the ancient Hebrews? They're worshiping created or imaginary things as if they were God. How are they doing that? They're creating statues, three-dimensional images. So that's why in Exodus 20, verse 3, it says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So that gives you the context. To go into verse 4, so don't make, how hard is this? If you're worshiping golden calves, three-dimensional images of imaginary things or demons or created things and treating it as God. Don't do it. That's the gist of the don't make statues of anything. And that's what it says. Anything in heaven above, i.e. the angelic, or the earth below, so as to worship them as if they were gods. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them. What's them? The gods, lowercase g, that you made. For I am the Lord, and I'm a jealous. Does it say never bow down? Don't have any images whatsoever? Don't venerate images? No. Do not serve them, it says. Do not worship them. They can't get this for some reason. So that's the fallacy of contextualization. Also, I would say they commit the fallacy of what's known as accident. And what does anybody know what the fallacy of accident is? I've even seen Roman Catholics commit this a lot too. Kate donates $10. Thank you so much. Okay. Fallacy of accident is when you take a rule, a general rule, and you apply it to things it's not intended to. It's when you treat a rule as if it were absolute. Now, there's a difference in ethics between objective, has to do with the ontological status. Is a rule objectively true, meaning independent of what I think or you think or feel? Then it's objective. Absolute means the stringency and degree and area in which it's applied. Is every rule that's objective in status applied everywhere equally at all times and all situations? No. Like, there's hardly any rules that are obviously, thou shalt not murder. You know, we can name a few, but most rules, again, context. So, and we'll talk about prayer in a second because this is leading up to what a Protestant. Let me give you a fallacy of accident. There is the rule that you should give property back to its rightful owner when you borrow it or it's lent to you. Now, if you have a Protestant mindset, be like, well, that's just applied everywhere at all times and the same degree. Okay. You borrow your neighbor's rifle to go hunting. Okay, it's your neighbor's property. And your neighbor has a psychotic break. Says he's locked himself up in his house. Says he's gonna kill his family and everybody that around him. But only if he had his rifle back. So he calls you or texts you and says, you know, the moral rule is law is that you're supposed to give property back to its rightful owner. What do? Well, here you've got the fallacy of accident. Clearly, you wouldn't be like, well, moral law says that. No, it's a rule. That's the fallacy. You're applying a general rule to areas it's not intended to include. So, again, they're taking away from the whole context in Genesis right there about, first of all, it doesn't say no images whatsoever. And then what do? They take that and they apply it to things. It's like, clearly that's not what God is intending to say. That's what it said. No. That's what you're taking out of the verse. You cut it up and you left stuff out to twist to your own destruction, to create some crazy iconoclast Gnostic heresy of iconoclasm. Yeah, like Mr. Then you can't have pictures of your family. And notice they're never consistent. They'll start adding stuff. Well, you can't have things that are here on earth and like. And by the way, it said nothing on earth or in the heavens. And it is pride. Furthermore, they don't realize the image, they don't understand the etymology and the meaning of image is not simply a visual image as far as a picture. Iconos, first of all, the Bible's an image. The entire world is an icon of God. This is why you can't have correct. They can't even worship Christ and the true God. Why? Because the theology of the icon is a necessary requirement to understand and direct your reference to the true God. Because he reveals himself through iconography. And I don't mean just the icons behind me. St. Maximus says, always and everywhere, God seeks to impress his image upon the created world. So, you're an image denier, then what does it mean? You are not worshiping the true God. So, I don't even think you can call, in even a loose sense, iconoclast Christian by any sense. All right. Let's go to this verse. This came up in Jim Bob's. And what have I said about Protestant icon? I'm just picking on the Protestant iconoclast. And not all Protestants, to be fair, are iconoclasts. I was a Lutheran. We weren't iconoclasts. Like, I never had a problem with images, so I can't relate to what's the matter with these people. So they're obsessed with invisibility. They hate visual images. That's what iconoclast means. So not only icons, and I actually think they're misanthropes too. They hate, much like liberals in the left, they hate humanity. Maybe not fully consciously that like they're going through and be like, I just hate human beings and myself. But they really do. And you see this expressed in the ascetics, in the beliefs of various groups, whether left, liberal, or iconoclasts. If you hate images and you're made in the image of God, you hate humanity. So you can't even have a correct anthropology. Why? Because they're obsessed with invisibility, a very Gnostic idea. So not only are they not like icons, what do they say the church is? Invisible. And if you think about it, they're really going into the visible, the this right here is the most real. They're actually, this is why I've always said, Protestants, I mean, apart from the ancient Gnosticism, they are thoroughly modern. Modernity, one of the things that is a common thing that marks out modernity is abstractionism. Moving away from the real incarnational, the person, the experience, the this right here, and moving into what? Who's the father of modernity? Descartes. So he starts his whole project with like doubting the real, the immediate, the imminent. And he goes inside his head. Oh, what's real are my own thoughts about myself and thoughts about my thoughts. And then all throughout modernity, they just basically an abolition of metaphysics, which is the real, the stuff out there. And they just focus on what? ideas and language and logic. The abstract, which is once, twice removed from reality. So they take what is unreal or less real and they invert it, they make it real, and then they deny, because there's the image right there, there's the visual image, the eminent. They deny the real and replace it with phantasms and propositions in their own head that only have reality, whatever level of reality, in virtue of the eminent and the real out there. So this is what Protestants, there is no visible church. What are they? I've always heard evangelicals say, church is not a building. First of all, it's like saying government's not a building. It's like, of course nobody thinks a government is identical to a building, but governments have buildings. I mean, if I want to go to Helen, like, Office of Records is in a building. There's the guy, like, I can see it, and it's not this building. Well, now when it comes to the church, it's invisible, you see. No wonder they can't find where the true church is, because they think it's invisible. How can you find something that's invisible and point to it? Oh, it's an idea, you see. As Father Russell says, an idea is simply a fantasy between your two ears. So they're living in a little fantasy world, in phantasms, thinking it's real, which is exactly what demons do, right? Look away from Christ and the cross and the real, and look. What do I say? What do demons do? They're real estate agents. They get you to invest in imaginary places. They don't exist. So same thing. Oh, now my fantasy in my head, well, that's what the church is. You see, this invisible idea that nobody can actually pin down or locate. And it's abstractionism. Notice politically the same thing too. We saw with like Antifa's not an organization, BLM's not an organization, it's not a real funded, which of course it is. It's an idea. Hallmark of modernity. German idealism. Libertarianism. Oh, it's an idea. It's a classic move of modernity. That's why Jim Bob asks, where's the physical location that I go? Can't. Because they think it's a fantasy between the two ears, an invisible idea in their head. Which, if you think about it, it's absolute insanity. So, this Protestant comes on, this evangelical non-denom. And symbols, then they take symbols to basically be the same thing, not knowing the etymology of symbols as symbios. The bringing together of two things. Heaven and earth. A symbol, it doesn't mean it's a metaphor, like, it means it's real. The symbolic is immanent and right there. It's a bringing of the two worlds, heaven and earth, together in a visual image, i.e. a symbol. And it's real. Well, they make it imaginary. Oh, it's a metaphor. It's not real. Another hallmark of modernity. So, this Protestant takes Matthew 6:6, answers the question, they don't go to church because church is where you go to pray, and you can't pray in public. So they read the verse, Matthew 6:6, but that when thou prayest, enter in the closet, and when thou shut the door, pray to the Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret reward thee openly. So they actually take this in a wooden, literal fashion and then do the fallacy of accident. They actually really think you can never pray in public. And that's why you can't have a church. You can't go to church because you're supposed to pray in your closet. So let's just carry through the absurdity of, not to mention we have countless examples where Christ commands people to pray in the synagogue. He tells the apostles in the garden to pray. That's not a closet. They just hand wave. They never look. That's why for a heretic, everything is evidence for their position. Nothing can be evidence against it. It doesn't matter how clear. I mean, how clear can you get? Is the garden where you're publicly praying a closet? Doesn't matter. Like they'll explain it away. It's nothing can be evidence for their position. What if you don't have a closet? I can't pray. Oh, well, wait a minute. Scripture also said pray without ceasing. So if you took this the way this Protestant was interpreting it, you could never leave the closet. Here's somebody that can't come out of the closet. Well, it says to pray without ceasing, and when I pray, I have to pray in a closet. So you can even pray in your own home. You have to pray in a closet. So you're a closet dweller for the rest of your life unceasing. This is how absurd. Yeah, and John 6. Nothing is real. So that, remember, I heard some Protestants say, how can it be a symbol? And it's like, that's what a symbol is. It's a bringing together of two. It doesn't exclude the real presence of Christ, because symbol means the real presence of the other, right? The bringing together of the other in the visible realm. That's how something can both be a symbol and the real thing, because that's what symbol means. Now, the way that God exists in his different modes is different. Correct? The way he exists in the Eucharist is different than the way he exists in his divine, in the theophanies in the Old Testament, and his energies and in creation, in the icon, his image in the, like, there's different modes, but it's really God. Oh yeah, St. Stephen. He was praying, well, stop snowing, I gotta go into the closet, and then you can snow me in the closet. So, Andrew Muller asked a question about what's the best way. So, again, it's the ability to... God's image is St. Maximus. He seeks to impress... The entire world is iconographic and triadic. He impresses his image in different ways. Obviously, the Father's image in the Son is very different than that. We do speak, in a loose sense, the Scripture is the Word of God. Why? Because the Word, the second person of the Trinity, is iconographically impressed in the teachings and the truth of Christ's message, i.e. the Word, are iconographically pressed in the words, the written words. So the Bible's an icon. Now, of course, we would, like, when you take care of, like, you would never think about, like, just throwing your Bible around or burning or something. Why? Because you realize that the uncreated, i.e. God, the only thing that is uncreated, is in a mode of existing in the written words. And therefore there's reverence given to even the physical book. Just like the American flag. There's an idea of what it means to be America in its kind of idealized form that's represented in the flag. And people saluting, unless you're a Jehovah's Witness, nobody thinks that you basically venerate the flag. Why? Because you offer reverence and respect to the idea of what America is through the flag. But in your mind, you realize the idea is not identical to the cloth and the fibers and the colors and stuff like that. It's a symbiose. They're brought together. Okay, and it represents, and so you venerate. You have respect and reverence, where the word veneration's in, and you don't drop the flag and you don't burn it. You don't do the same thing with the Bible. So when we see the image of saints in Christ in the wooden paint, we realize that is not actually God, the paint but the image that is real is present, right? The uncreated image, and the created, because obviously Christ took on human nature, created human nature, is present in the wooden paint, so that when you venerate and worship, when you worship Christ, you're not worshiping the wood. You're able to make that distinction. It is offered through, just like with the flag, through the matter in which the image is present, to the archetype, which is the image itself, the person itself, etc. That's so. It's only idolatry when you're worshiping the created rather than the creator. That's why the ancient Hebrew idolaters were actually worshiping something that wasn't God. And the pagans were idolaters because they were worshiping matter. They're unable to distinguish between the creator of matter, how the creator could be present and fillest all things and sustaining it, versus the thing that's actually created. Yeah, and Locha, people kind of like mark up there, but like I always kind of felt weird even doing that, like putting highlighters, and even when I was a Protestant. And the reason why is that although I spent time in evangelical Christianity, low church, my mind, my heart were never in that, which is why as soon as I graduated high school, Calvary Chapel, I moved as far away from that and Protestantism as possible to like high church. And then think about, who goes even further than Muslims? The Amish, right? They actually remove faces off dolls because it's an image. They literally have NPC dolls, and okay, there's that. Let's see, what else did I want to talk? Then the other thing, I'll find Protestants are like, well, I don't have a problem, venerating my parents or something like that because they're alive. The saints aren't. That's crazy. The soul is immortal. when you die, you don't cease to exist. I mean, all Protestants become like Seventh-day Adventists or something? Like, oh, soul sleep. They can't. Consciousness, awareness is a property of the essence, your rational soul. Like, so even if you're not a saint, you don't cease to exist. I mean, this goes all the way, it doesn't take Christianity to figure this out. This goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle. They knew that. That when you have your physical death and the soul is separated from the body, you don't cease to exist. So, I mean, these Protestants are further out than the pagan philosophers. Like, how bad is that? They're dead. You can't pray to, like, dead people can't hear. It's like, of course they can. Furthermore, it's just anti-scripture. God is a God of the living, not the dead. And the saints who are with God, have union with God, the theosis, they get a God's eye view, right? It's the power of God that dwells in them. They're living in God, right? And just think about how bad theology this is. We're not spiritually and metaphysically united as Christians. It's very materialistic. Here on earth, we're united. That's why we pray for one another. One of the reasons is to keep us in communion. And you're saying, so your Protestant God is so weak that he can't maintain that after death. Didn't God conquer death? Not even death can separate us from the love of Christ. We're united in the church triumphant too. In the church triumphant with the... That's how we maintain communion. Right? Just like I would ask you to pray for me here living on this earth, right? It keeps us all in communion with God. And you intercede. You take a prayer, a petition before God. The saints in heaven do that too. It's nothing of their own power. It's because it's God living in them. What do you think the halo, the aura around them? It's the life and energies of God living in. So it's just totally crazy. What do you mean souls remaining on earth? I'm not getting that. I'm a soul on earth. Like, what do I think about myself or my neighbors, my wife? I don't get. You have to be clearer. Yeah, and chat here, it's a good... Our mothers and fathers are patriarchs, right? So I have to honor them as well. But the whole person, you can't just be like, well, I just honor their soul because they're dead that's not what the person is. The person is a whole. Which leads me into my next discussion, actually, I want to talk about personhood. Ghosts. The best person to turn on that to is Father George Aquaro, because he's had the most kind of experience with that. He's in Pullman, Washington. By far, most of those apparitions are probably demons. But he has had encounters, and this was his explanation. So, if you think about the pit, go back to the Old Testament, Sheol, Hades. It's the place of the dead. And it wasn't a good place. There was a section out of that called for the righteous called Abraham's bosom, in which there was a level of kind of blessedness in there, but they weren't. That itself still was not a good situation, and because there was still, what does a pit do? It holds you captive. You're separated from your body. You can't pray. Read the Psalms. I'm like a deaf man that goes down to the pit. I can't, like a mute man who cannot speak. Anyways, what does Christ do? He takes on human nature so that he can enter into the grave, death, he can die. He enters in, but because of the hypostatic union, he's fully God. He's a divine person. The human nature and soul and the divine nature, the deity, cannot be separated because they're united in the divine person. That's the second person of the Holy Trinity, Christ. So the human nature allows him to enter in, but life itself, the divine, cannot be separated from that. So he takes all of human nature in, and the grave can't hold him. So he breaks through. Now, he doesn't come out where he came in. You don't see him pop back out on the cross. He breaks out the other side. And the analogy that Father George uses is like a tunnel. Now, death is like a tunnel. It's not a pit anymore. In which we all go in, and all the dead shall rise. Some to eternal bliss and some to eternal torment. They experience the other side in terms of who they are, who they became. Okay, but all are raised, right? All go through. Father George says that he believes he's had some encounters of what people would call ghosts, that people that did not go through that are still kind of for whatever reason. Now, I don't know if that's true. He's just explained there's no official doctrine on, but he had some type of encounter that somebody basically was lost, kind of, that was in a church and was like tapped and doing stuff in the church. And Father George encountered it, and it basically was requesting prayers to be released and to go have the soul proceed to the other side through the tunnel. So take that for what it's worth. But I would say by far the majority, if that even is possible, what are typically called ghosts are obviously demonic manifestations. Because that's obviously not what's supposed to happen, if that even does happen. There are no such thing as a past life, so that one's pretty easy to deal with. Yeah, and there's it's just, we get bits and pieces about what life after death is like before the final judgment. It's not quite clear. That's why there's no strong kind of dogmatic theology and pronouncements about what exactly is going on. Yeah, I'll tell you exactly why that's probably in Hawaii. The Hawaiians, even though they were Christianized, like a lot of people, natives of a particular area, they'll return back to their pagan roots. So they're actually worshiping, they have like gods that they like, the god of, like, I forget the different Hawaiian gods and stuff like that. And they're basically calling on, like, it's no surprise to me that they have a lot of demonic activity in those communities. Was it Father George? Like I said, he says he encountered someone. He gave like a theological explanation of how that's possible. I don't know. Like I said, it's not dogmatic. It's not received. I guess it's possible the way he explains it, but I don't have a dog in the fight. All right, let's talk about persons, though. Personhood is one of the most difficult hypostasis, right? Which typically admits substance, and the Father's begins to change and move over to meaning personal subject, i.e., person. And we're going to talk about that. Unless you guys have any other questions. There is, I will say that, and still, it's as far as the details is kind of unclear what or how that works or what that looks like. But there is traditions in the Orthodox Church that are kind of toll houses, and what that means is, again, not purgatory or like literal toll houses that you go through or something like that, but it describes, kind of generally speaking, theologically how the soul proceeds after death. It follows the life of Christ as well. So Christ is in the tomb for 3 days. His soul separated from the body. With the prayer, in the tomb with your body and soul, in Hades, i.e. the pit, with your soul, in paradise with the thief, together with the Father and the Spirit, O you who are boundless. So the soul, what we mean by death, the physical death, is the soul that animates the body, that's present in every aspect of the body, that grows, unites the physical parts of the body, grows, has the rationality that's of your mind, your spirit, within the soul, right? Your spiritual aspect, being united with God, the Nous, etc., is all within the soul. And the soul is incarnated and animates the body. Then at death, it's separated. So the body's no longer animated. Anima means soul. It's no longer in soul. That's what we mean by death. It's really difficult to talk about, well, if the soul is no longer incarnated, where is it? Because it's not incarnating, it's hard to talk about it spatially, so it becomes somewhat metaphoric. It seems like it could be present around the body. It's in a place, at least metaphysically, called the pit. And then Christ rises on the third day. Okay. Now, and then remember, there's 40 days. There's also 40 days in which he wanders the earth. So there is some tradition of 3 days in the pit, in death, in which the soul kind of wanders around. The body's kind of disoriented. I've heard it described. That's why we pray over the body for the soul of the departed, to give it peace and guidance to the other side. And then 9 days from our perspective, we mark the night. Like, obviously, like the other side doesn't have the kind of time that so I don't know I haven't been there. I haven't know what that's like chronologically. But we mark it by 9 days, right? Which represents the 9 hierarchies of angels, right? Being taken up to the throne of God, surrounded by the seraphim, the cherubim, and which there's a tradition that all are taken through the pit up 9 days through the hierarchy of the 9 rankings of angels to worship the Holy Trinity, and then come back down for 40 days, kind of wandering, somehow metaphysically but still connect, right? They're still they're not completely separated from Earth. I've heard one describe too that the noetic realm is closer to you than your own thoughts and your own breath. So it'd be like if I took, I'll take my nose spray. This is a three-dimensional object. So if you thought about the physical world, instead of being three-dimensional, imagine it's two-dimensional. It's a two-dimensional plane. The spiritual world, the noetic realm, lies on every aspect of the physical world. They're not separated. That's why the world is the symbolic world. The two worlds are intimately connected together, even closer than your own thoughts are to your mind and your breath to your own self. So imagine this two-dimensional object here representing the noetic realm. It lies on the physical realm. Now, from the two-dimensional realm, all you see is the three-dimensional object is only two-dimensional. But if there's something like that, perhaps that's a good analogy to explain how it might, the souls, when they come back to find their final resting place, waiting to the general resurrection, final resurrection, rest somewhere like that. You can't see it, right? But it's still there. Now, the reason why I would actually argue that is because like the like when we do the uncovering of relics, changing out, like, for example, the vestments or shoes of Saint Spiridon, the shoes are worn out. But it's not like the vestments got up and walked, but they have some contact, like they're worn out as if he was walking around. Like, how is that possible? How is it possible that the saints actually act through their relics? And even icons. The tears come out of icons. There's even, the Theotokos speaking through the icon. That's something like that. The noetic realm is touching on that, right? Like a window that we can't see apart from the two-dimensional, if I use the analogy, of the icon or the relic or the body or something like that. So I know that they're here. I know that the dead are no longer animating their body, but they're not disconnected from it, because it says that that body is the body. It's not another body. It's not like God's going to go over to the other side of the earth and take a bunch of matter and reconstruct a body. There's some intrinsic link between the soul and particular matter that's, still linked. Even if it's not inside animating, it's linked to like that, like paper. And can even act through it somehow. So I think that's important too. So something's either entirely separated, it's either in and animating, or it's, I wish I had a better, what does an overlap mean? It's a contact, right? In which the contour of this, how do I make this object here, I wish I had a ball, overlap something else? This is not only is it contact, it's overlapping. The circle here overlaps the circle there. This circle here is a three-dimensional object. This is a two. So that's overlapping. Well, you can't get a glimpse of something if it's not real. What are you glimpsing? Otherwise, you're just fantasy in your head, and you're not actually seeing anything or glimpsing. So if you're glimpsing something, it's a something that you're glimpsing. And if it's, meaning it's actually there. And But things can be there in different modes, like I just gave you. Yeah, I wouldn't call 3 plus 7 overlapping. I'll look up the overlap, the etymology of. That's a synthesis. That's an addition, right? So overlappings are additions, but not every addition is an overlap. It's a Middle English word, overlapping, of two Old English words, over, and lappen, to wrap. First recorded use is 1726, which is exactly that. This is over this, and what does it do? It covers and wraps the second thing right there. If I have two circles, right, I'll take and put it over, what do you say? Like, this one is over this one. And it's wrapping, right? Either fully or partially. It says here, meaning to partially cover or extend over something. Or fully cover, to wrap over fully, or at least partially. That's the... No, that's fine. Ask questions, no cookies. We did a whole chapter on memory. It's one of the worst. Anybody making an epistemic claim for memory is and some of the worst ones. So the fact that children are saying they have memories of past lives. First of all, children themselves are some of the most epistemically suspicious. Children live in fantasy. Think about how many times they've been brought in is why it's so difficult in courts to bring them as eyewitnesses, because they create, not like with intention, like malicious intention. But I remember from other children, like literally creating stuff that was not real and experiencing it. So there's a problem of overly active imaginations, and I've even remember events of projecting and seeing stuff that my imagination was so that it even brought it out into and able to see, like, well, that's obviously not the case. The other problem is just memory in general. That because the mind is constructive, you never actually... Memories are not identical to, or not accurate, or even, line up with the actual events that you're remembering. One thing that I can tell you is this comes up in crime and legal stuff. There was somebody that was robbed when I was in California at a parish. This old lady, there was a criminal couple waiting outside that assaulted her and stole her purse. I ran after. I was like in my cassock and I was like chasing them down and everything in my car, and they got away. Um, and then the police came and they were taking reports and they were asking me questions. And I had a real experience. Now, what immediately started happening when they were at, they were like, okay, well, what side of the car did the lady that jumped out or jumped into the car? Did she jump into the passenger or the? And it started changing. I'm like, oh, she was in the driver's seat, and I'm like, no, actually, she was in the passenger seat. And I'm like, dang it. My mind was literally recreating from a real event that happened, so it wouldn't actually match up. And then they were like, well, what color a shirt? Give a description. And that was changed. I was like, oh, it was a blue shirt. No, it was I'm like, shh. So this is the unreliability of memory. I've also had false memories. I was just talking with a friend yesterday where, you know, I've heard a story so many times about my friends that I actually placed myself in that. I'm like, oh yeah, I like knew the details. I could picture it. And he was like, no, you weren't there. I'm like, yeah, no, I was there, right? So the whole issue of false memories, and again, the act of mind, it can never pull up the experiences that actually existed. It will reconstruct, right? So, yeah, like nobody in their right mind should, because a child said, like, I had a past memory of a past life. Well, first of all, we just know theologically there are no past lives. Reincarnation's false. So, how do you interpret the children? What they're saying? It's like it's not real. It's not a real memory. They have an overactive imagination. Memory itself is an act of reconstruction. So there's false memories, there's false testimonies, all of these things which could go into, not to mention, yeah, like we're all being deceived noetically through our imagination, and memories but we all know that reincarnation is false, like that doesn't exist, so that's how you answer. Snow cookies, $10. How do I know that what I unknowingly don't know? Doesn't in some way. Hold on. What if they demonstrate knowledge they have no access to? Maybe demonic, like. I mean, the fact of the matter is we know that's not possible. So you have to reinterpret. You can't just look at data, right? It's all presuppositions. So if there's no such thing as false lives, you have to use that to interpret, like, then what's going on? Also, it's a weird view of, and I talked about this, maybe goes to Snow Cookie's questions too. We don't even know how exactly, facts and information may not always come in the same way. There's an example we were talking about with blind sight cases. So it's when the people have injury of the visual cortex, and they're perceptually blind, either fully blind, which is the most rare case, or they can't see certain objects, numbers or colors, shapes, even if they can see. And yet, if they ask them to guess, like, well, what shapes are on the paper, they get it right. So how is it they know this? We don't know. Like, but it certainly doesn't mean, you don't go to something that's like reincarnation or aliens to explain something like that. I've had experiences too where I was, when my wife once, when she was, in her disability, she had to be admitted to the hospital because of ER for her pain levels. And I was walking by a room when I was leaving, And I could see peripheral of the room, and I could see the thing was kind of covered up. So I couldn't see the people. And a name came to my head. Like, I just knew with the person. I wasn't even seeing it, the person, because they're behind a curtain. And it was the first philosophy professor that I'd ever taken when I went to a junior college straight out of high school. And it came to me so strong, and without a doubt, I'm like, it's this professor. Like, I don't even know how I know that. And I tested it. I yelled out his last name. I'm like, Dezita. And he comes out and he's like, yes. And I'm like, that's so crazy. I've had that happen a couple different times. So how could I get information that doesn't come in the same way? I don't know, like how that their mind's able to receive stuff. So if that's possible, of course, with, even if we don't consider demonic suggestions and information, it's obviously possible the mind can actually know stuff beyond its its perception. So the child did not live a past life. Could it know certain facts of, yeah, well, if I could, if there's also the case of the fireman who everything perceptually looked normal, but he was like, I know something's wrong, and he pulled his men out and then it collapsed. Like, how did he know that if it wasn't his perceptual experience? So obviously information can come in and non-normative ways. But number two, this is absolutely demons could do this. What do you think people who are involved with the occult can know stuff about other people and past lives and stuff? Like, because demons were there and they're giving them the information. Like, it's insane that anybody would think, well, the first conclusion of that is, well, it must have been they lived a past life. That's just insane to me. Again, the foundations of knowledge is divine revelation. And divine revelation tells us there's no such thing as reincarnation. It destroys the whole resurrection, soteriology, right? It's a total demonic doctrine. And what I would say, it probably is demons. Why? If it gets you to believe in a demonic theory called reincarnation, because children are saying they're having... my guess is it's probably demons because congratulations, they got you to believe in their demonic doctrine of reincarnation. It's the same thing that demons will do. You see these, the house is haunted, right? And they bring in some new age spiritualists with crystals and burning sage, and it goes away. Does that mean that the sage and the crystals actually have power over it? No. The demons they went away because their task was accomplished. I got you to believe in the demonic idea of New Ageism and crystals, and we see the same account in the gospel story of the lunatic boy. He was called a lunatic because he was being possessed and attacked by a demon that's cast out by Christ later on the phases of the moon. Now, why would he only attacked the child and he fell into the water and the fire during the phase of the moon? Why? Because the demons were trying to get the public to believe in a demonic superstition that the moon had power over them. That the Lord was not the Lord who rules all things, but the moon, you see, the phases of that's what demons do. So if they give children facts, they give it to psychics and stuff like that, about information that there's no way they could know, then to get them to believe in a false demonic idea or doctrine, I would say odds are it's probably demons giving them information. But even if that, I give you countless examples of non-perceptual knowing that I can't actually explain. So I don't go to some bizarro, retarded theory because I can't explain. All right, let's go. Snow cookies. How do I know that unknowingly. So you're not aware of the things that you don't know. You don't. Well, let me put it this way. It seems that you're assuming what's the Cartesian view of, it's called the strong theory of knowledge. And with the traditional view of knowledge, you have three conditions in order to know something. You have a belief condition. You can't know something if you don't believe it. You have a truth condition. It can't be knowledge unless it's your belief's actually true. But that would just be coincidence. Therefore, you have to have a justification condition, the third condition. With Descartes, the strong version means that it has to be indubitable. In other words, you have to be able to eliminate all doubt, which is what you brought up. Like, think, well, I might be wrong. I might not know. Almost nobody holds to that view. Well, I don't know. I mean, how do I know this actually isn't the case? Like, the reason why is because if we held to a strong version, there would be like basically nothing that you would know. Like, it's too stringent of a condition. So the weak version, which is what most people sometimes also called fallibilism, is the justification doesn't have to be. I don't have to actually say. I have to know that I know, and rule out any possibility of doubt, and therefore the justification be infallible in order to know. They weaken it to, it just has to be enough. It's sufficient. Yeah, it might be possible that you were wrong about your evidence. But really what guarantees it is, again, but as if it's true. So you can't, if you believe it's true and it's true, right, there's a sense that it's like, well, that can't be impaired. So then it's a question of, well, do I have enough evidence? I mean, think about this. I always use, just to point out the absurdity, like taking the other view is literally mental insanity. You wouldn't be able to live, you'd lock somebody up that thought this way. There's a gas station next door. Okay, I believe it. If it's true there's a gas station next door, and I have reasons to believe that's true, then I know there's a gas station next door. Now somebody comes along and is like, but how do you know? What if there's things you don't know, like possibly that it's just a facade in front for a Black Ops site or something like that? I'm like, but you don't know, so you don't know. Like, no, that's crazy. Do I have sufficient evidence? Yeah, it might be possible, but highly unlikely. As long as I have sufficient, well, how do you know that when you drive away, it doesn't disappear? And if you don't rule that, I could just go through this series of, well, I could raise a possible doubt, and if you don't know that, that's not the case, then you don't know. You would lock somebody and be like, you're insane. Like, that's crazy. All I need is a sufficient amount of evidence. Is it enough justification, evidence, reasons to believe? Even though it might be possible it's not? Yeah. Well, then if it's true, right, I have sufficient justifications and I believe it to be true, then it's knowledge. That's what I would say. Now, of course, let's talk about, does it mean that there could be, nobody has a list of all factors that could be known. Is it theoretically possible that this is exactly how in science things go wrong? Let me get my science book from the University of Science out. Let me show you how you could get something wrong in science. Where's the cathode ray experiment? So what makes scientific experiments so difficult is that you're not aware of all the possible factors. Now you try to isolate that, but there's certain things that I'm gonna have to look up on here. There's certain things that you can miss that you weren't aware of. I can't remember. So cathode ray basically is an experiment of passing a high voltage electricity, right? You have a cathode and an anode, right? A positive and negative, and then you can get a obviously a ray that occurs. And what happened is, I remember back on this experiment. They thought that they got, it was Thompson, J.J. Thompson. But who was the person before, the scientist before? It was just to detect electrons. If I remember the problem, I think it was Faraday that they got it wrong. Is it was bending or something like that. And they actually didn't know they didn't know that they didn't create a vacuum in, and they were basically electrically charged atoms, which are naturally present in the air. But I think, gosh, I wish I could remember this experiment. Does anybody remember this? It led to a faulty conclusion because they missed a piece of information. That it actually wasn't a vacuum. There was air and other particles coming in. That was the. So I'm just using that as an example. There's countless examples in science too. Let's take a phlogiston theory too. The idea it's no longer accepted in science that matter has and atoms have negative weight because they thought when things were oxidized, they'd notice what was left over, the carbon or whatever, decreased in mass. And so they came up with a theory that that obviously, combusted oxygen or whatever has a negative weight, has a negative principle in it, that you could attach negativity to the actual weight and would bring down the weight. Rather than, more developed atomic theory of weights and stuff, that you're actually burning off certain organic parts and leaving the carbon so that it would be less weight. So like, well, I didn't have knowledge. My experiments are affected because I missed something. And that's why really in science we get to the point where it's like, one of many arguments, we can't really know anything in science because there's no way that you could construct a perfect experiment. You'd have to be omniscient. Like, I know that I got all the factors. That's why it's constantly changing. We later find out, oh, we missed this, and that's what's affecting this. Oh, atoms have an atomic weight. There isn't, stuff like that. So I think that is possible. Or having beliefs that you do believe that affect the things that you think that you know, such that you don't know. That's possible. That's obviously true as well. Well, yeah, it can't be knowledge if it wasn't true. You could believe that you knew. You could even be justified in some saying that of the claim, I'm in possession of knowledge and still be wrong about that. But it's like, well, the person was just or they ended up just being wrong about. But you could never actually say they really did have knowledge and it wasn't true. That's impossible. All right. Let me see if there's any more super chats to read. Let's talk about personhood, shall we? Do you remember this argument that I made? People were really confused about tag. I'm going to read something. See if I can pull up the Garby paper. Theistic fallacies. Where's my theistic fallacies? This is going to be a deep dive. Theistic fallacies, come on. Pull it up 1 second. Academia.edu. Sorry, forgive me. Garby, let me check. I don't think he's responding yet. I wanted to get him on to discuss his paper. We'll get him. Don't worry. It's, I know he's doing a conference or something. I've had several questions of where people were like, well, I get that, God has to be a necessary. Well, first of all, God's not a rigid designator. So, despite what these are, I still can't figure. I was just watching Tomas Bogardus try to explain that God is a rigid designator, and I'm like, I don't know how they do the mental gymnastics to get around that, because rigid designator, defined by Kripke, is that it picks out the same entity in every possible world. So if that word doesn't, then it's not a rigid designator. So the fact that God could pick out you, do you not know that you're gods? The gods of nations. It could pick out Thor. It could pick out an imaginary. It could pick out a demon. Clearly, it's the word is not picking out the same thing in every possible. Like, I have no idea how they try to argue that. It's crazy. All right, so that doesn't make sense to say. Well, I understand how God, because the necessary condition. It's like, well, what do you mean by that? That doesn't make. Well, all the omnis, omniscient. That's not right. That's not enough to pick out God. Otherwise, we've got the problem of, okay, well then, well, Muslims have that, but I want to go into, and we're back on the Garrity paper of this all depends on what's called the rational core. That two fallacious assumptions. First of all, that there is a rational core, that you can know it, and that those are the sufficient number of central properties to hit a referent that operates more like a mental object rather than. Number two, you're basing this all on a theory of reference that works for empirical objects because we can investigate them empirically. You can't be like, well, let's just go take a look at the Trinity and see if that's accurate. You can't do that. So they operate much more like mental objects. So that's the other. Number three, it's natural theology, which is heretical, and that's why I may tag that it's either autonomous or theonomous. So you're assuming what you want to prove that you can know apart before you can know. Establish that knowledge exists. So that's number, what is that, number 3 or number 4? I want to pull up a quote though. This is another point. It's always so hard for me to find this section. Yeah, here it is. I'll pull this up. Suppose we assume that the reason why it's erroneous to assume that, because people are going to ask, well, I get why God's necessary but not the Trinity. Well, God is the Trinity. Like, there's no generic, like, so I didn't say, like, the word works, you just plug for tag. Just plug it in because it's not a rigid designator. It can mean different. And somebody said, well, what, like, a being that's omnibenevolent, omniscient, creator of all, and does that pick out? Yeah, it picks out the Trinity. It doesn't pick out the philosopher's God or the Islamic, like, and the reason why it's, he says, for example, because those are shared properties between different gods. So you can't, by the term God, be referring to one and only one God. if there's actually different gods, right? And there is no core, just like simply because I have two games and be like, I make some argument about the rules of the game. Um, well, suppose in the situation it's either solitaire or it's poker. Does simply getting the commonalities therefore single out and fix on the referent of the game as exclusion to the other? Simply because there's similarities? In this case, it would be the omnis, right? No. Because apart from cards, the fact that they're hands and rules, winning strat, there's literally very in common between them. So me getting a list of properties for a game, right? There is no game that, right, that has just the core rules, since there is no such playable card game, which would only include their common properties. So this is why when somebody asks, well, I get how it works for God. There is no generic God any more than there's a generic game between solitaire and poker. So either it's not referring through the omnis to anything other than your just an idea in your head, or it's referring to the Trinity, and therefore the Trinity is necessary for. But it's like this. Here's another example. If people share the property of having legs, hands, and a head, this fact does not justify the assumption that there is a real human being who shares only these properties. That's why getting the omnes, there is no God that just has the omnes. Therefore, it doesn't pick out anything by just getting a list of those properties, unless you already assume those things belong to the Trinity, in which case the Trinity is the necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge. Does that make sense? Now, I can give some other arguments for this too to show, but I'm just trying to show you the fallacious reasoning, and I'll get why it works for God, but not the Trinity. How do we prove the Trinity? I'm like, because God is a Trinity. He's revealed himself as, and not a monad, and not the philosopher's God. What does Pascal say? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not the God of philosophers. In other words, the Trinity. Like, there's no other God. What are you talking about? All right. So far, so good? Because now we're going to take a deep dive in. I also made an argument for proportionality. In order to relate two things that are different, there must be something that they share that's similar by which you can relate. Otherwise, it's incommensurate. Especially if the incommensurate are opposite categories. This is what creates the mind-body problem. I have no way to either causally or ontologically relate these two categories if they're defined in opposites, which is what Descartes left us with. What is body? Material bodies? Extended in space, non-intentional, third person objective, under the constraints of causal laws of physics described by microphysics, etc. Okay, well, what's mind? Not spatially located, not third person objective, first person subjective, intentional, not causally closed, not described by the microphysics. It's like, oh, now you've got a mind-body problem. You literally have got two opposites. They're not just commensurate, they're opposites. How do I relate them? Logically, causally, ontologically, it's a problem. That's what the... Okay. So, assuming for the sake of the argument that God is the necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge, how do I obtain that? If I'm in the opposite category. Well, what do we mean by God? Well, he's uncreated. He's uncircumscribable. He's infinite. He's transcendent. But what am I? I'm just the opposite of it. Literally, I'm finite. I'm created. I'm circumscribable. So even if God were the necessary conditions, I can't ever get there. I have no proportion. Oh, analogia entis. Well, there's an analogy between being... Well, you're just repeating the same question. What is... There's nothing uncreated, uncircumscribable, transcendent being has in common with created, finite, circumscribed being. Just because you put the word being in, it's like that's what's in question. So I need a proportion in order to relate those. For me to relate to the necessary condition, which obtaining mentally, spiritually, etc., is necessary. But what are we told in Revelation? God is not an essence. He's not an object. He's a person. God, on Mount Sinai, tells Moses his name, I am who am. He gives a personal pronoun. He doesn't say I'm a absolute essence or something. He actually says I. Like I'm a person. I'm talking to you. I'm revealing. Essence don't talk to you. Objects don't. Objects can't reveal. Objects can't relate themselves. You can relate objects in essence. Why? Because you're a person. So God reveals himself as personal. Let us create man in our own image. Personal pronoun. Plural. Elohim itself is plural. Okay. So what I want to argue, and I was at a conference with David Bradshaw yesterday online where he presented his paper on Boethius' concept of philosophy, the person. This is present on academia.edu. I'll share it in the chat real quick so you can follow along if you can't see it very well on the stream. The reason why I can make an argument for the necessity of the Trinity. Now, David Bradshaw and I qualified, what do we mean by necessary? Because I've seen Muslims and even Protestants try. There's different things we can be by logical necessity. Oh, so God couldn't be otherwise? He couldn't... Well, necessity means eternally that in every possible world. It could also mean logical constraint. So, when we say, is it impossible for God to do this? Right? Therefore, is it necessary? Yeah, it's impossible for God not to be a Trinity, and not because he's constrained, because that's what he is eternally, uncreated in every logically possible world. Do you see? So it's like talking about logical necessity from our side versus on the other side, is there anything back of God that conditions him? Very clear to say, like, no, he's absolutely free, right? But that doesn't mean what you think it is. Well, he's free to not be a Trinity. Like, no, because what it means to be necessary is the identity of something, what it is always in every logically possible world. That's not a constraint by God. That's what it is. Okay, very important. All right. So we get to the idea that personhood is necessary to relate us human persons to the divine person. If he's a necessary condition for us to obtain it and be able to actually state it. And to know that. Okay. So far, so good. Well, why can't he just be the Unitarian person? Because personhood is defined by relation to the other person. And we're going to go over, people are like, how do you know that? Don't worry about it. I just know it. No. We'll go over, in one sense, by reductio, another sense, etymology, philosophical analysis of what the term person actually means and implies. And the easy way to think about this, well, persons aren't objects or essences, right? There's something more than persons have an essence. So we have to figure out, well, what does that mean? Okay. This then goes into, a person does imply a relation to the other. They're defined by that, outside of themselves, to relation to the other. Then God obviously can't be a monad, a strict monad. So the other option is dyad. St. Gregory Nazianzus states, monad, one, undivided, is defined in opposite to dyad, and let's just do difference. There's sameness and difference. Plato even thought about this, the Greeks. Monad means it's one, undivided, not different. So if I say Hesperus and Phosphorus are one thing, it's Venus. The morning star is the evening star. Right? I don't have a dyad, I have a monad. Like, oh, the two things, A is B. Okay? And I appeal to the principle of the monad, the unity, to explain that. But because monad is not multiple, not different, but the same, I can't explain through monad how something could be distinct and different. That's dyad. But dyad is not monad, by definition. Sameness is not difference. So, I have no way through the principle of sameness and difference, monad and dyad, to explain how God could be, who is personal, relating to the other who is God, which is different. A different person. So St. Gregory Nazianzus says, only triad completes that dialectical tension. Triad is not bound by, right, and defined, restricted by, it's neither monad nor is it dyad, but it encompasses both and transcends it. So it's reversing the Greek metaphysics that one, monad is the principle of all things, triad is. So any multiple of that is just a repeat in principle of, and reducible to 4, 5, right? It could be reducible 2 and 2, 1 and 3, 2 and 3, etc. So we see in the principle behind all reality and personhood itself, the necessary condition must be triad. That's a sort of kind of reductio. So I can give an argument for it. But there's no principle behind God like there's a logical law of triad, right? The condition. That's what he is. God is the Lord who's revealed himself. He's Trinity in every possible world. Not because he's constrained or restrained, but that's because what he is eternally and in every logical possible world. So it's necessary. So Trinity is a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge. All right. How do we know person has relation to the other? That's what you guys want to know. Let's go to Dr. David Bradshaw's. We can do by reductio. So this is the paper that he gave yesterday. Let's just read the synopsis. What is a person? This question is difficult because we ourselves are persons, and we consider our status as persons fundamental to who we are. This is clear enough from the cognate terms formed around the root person, personal, impersonal, personality, personhood, personify, and others. That which is personal to someone is that which touches most closely on who he is, and thus is intimate and perhaps secret in the way other things are not. The impersonal is that which fails to treat someone as a person. That's what I was talking about. Object and essence is literally definitionally impersonal, and to some degree falsifies the personal status. And that's why I'm going to argue, and David Bradshaw too, you're not reducible to an essence. You're more than an essence or object. You're a person who has an essence. And that's why if you do try to reduce personhood to individualized rational essence, it has harmful consequences. Someone's personality is how he characteristically acts and relates to others. See? You already see when you start thinking about what the word, like, how do I use this word? And Aristotle does, how do we use these words? Well, your personality is how you act and relate to others. And his personhood is the moral and spiritual status that accrues to being a person. So you can develop your person. And so on. And your personality, right? In terms indicate that we value being persons highly. Indeed, we can hardly conceive ourselves without it. The question is, what is a person? Is thus tantamount, how do we understand what we are and why we find our own being valuable and significant? Our classic definition of person is what St. John Damascus, and because he's in here. This is not a saint. Forgive me. Our one classic definition of person is that of John Locke. And I'll say that too, I think he relates this with Descartes, even though they have disagreement. A brief look at it will help orient our inquiry. Locke writes in his essay concerning human understanding, we must consider what persons stand for, which I think is a thinking, intelligent being that has a reason and reflection, can consider itself as itself, the same thinking thing in different times and places, which is not like by that, which it does only by that consciousness which is inseparable from thinking, as it seems to me essential to it. Plainly, Locke's emphasis is on what one might call our mental identity. There's no mention of the body, nor a biological history and origins, nor a need for a relationship with one another, nor a capacity for relationship with God. Despite Locke's disagreement with Descartes on the issues separating rationalists and purists, he offers what is fundamentally a Cartesian absolutely understanding of the person, one who ultimately just thinks, res cogitans. Within this context, it's refreshing to turn much earlier definition of person, that given by Boethius in his work against Eutyches and Nestorius. Boethius shares with Locke the intuition that persons are limited to rational beings, including, he says, God. And isn't it, even David Bradshaw, God, the Latin is ambiguous, right? But rational beings, angels and men. Accordingly, he defines a person or persona as, quote, an individual substance of a rational nature. Unlike Locke, Boethius does not locate personhood within the person's occurrent mental life, but within the rational nature and that underlies and enables it. Locke's definition leaves it unclear whether someone who is in a coma, for example, or any other reason lacks reason or reflection at the present time counts as a person. That a Boethius makes clear that questions about such current activity are irrelevant. What matters is the individual in question possessions a rational nature. Now, even that's going to become problematic. And there's the definition that Locke gives from the Essay on Human Understanding. And then that's just the explanation we just went over, why Boethius kind of gets out of the problems of somebody who are in a coma. One of the problems with this too, I want to just see if you guys have any questions we're going through. I will end up, if we don't define person in contra to these, the rational nature, you're going to end up being a heretic. If we confuse nature and person, you're going to be a heretic. That's what we're going to see in this. And that's what came up uh, how would you describe would fetus be in and then that came up too because we had ethicists too. They wanted to stay away from that language and thought because it's so ambiguous, don't make arguments for rights to life or that you can't based on personhood. I don't know if that's correct or not. Base it on other things. Probably like Aristotle's first and second act of rationally. Obviously, fetuses have the essence at first act, even though they don't have second, and therefore that's enough. It's sufficient to guarantee that you have to protect the life of it. That's probably where they're going. I think Anscombe is one person that probably defends that, and so that although it may be true, and we believe that, it may not be fruitful to actually try to ground our arguments that you shouldn't take a life if simply because it's a person, but that there's other factors too. All right. Problem is, if we simply go with Locke and Boethius, that it's a rational nature, guess what problem we have? That would make... I'm on the wrong... the Trinity to be one person. Why? They share one nature. And that's what he brings up. According to the Nicene Orthodoxy, each of the divine person. Now he's obviously using this because he was talking to, he originally presented this to a Roman Catholic philosophers conference. Each of the divine persons is co-substantial of the same substance with others. This substance is, of course, rational. So the definition would appear to make the entire Trinity one person. An individual substance of a rational nature. That's why you can't use that. And not three. Yeah, notice Boethius doesn't use that definition when discussing the Trinity. Interesting. He does go in. The Greeks call individual substances because, so notice individual substances, hypostasis, because they underlie the rest and are put under the subject to certain things such as accidents, and therefore we also call them substances put under, substar, right? Standing under. Yes, that's good. After all, the persons of the Trinity are not simply individual entities who share a common nature. So in Aristotle's primary substance is the primary substance of rational nature, essence, individuated substance, is exactly what persons are. And so he's making a point. This is inadequate. After all, the persons of the Trinity are not simply individual entities who share a common nature. Good point, David. As do Aristotelian primary substances as species. Yeah, the persons of the Trinity are not species of a genus. Each is the divine nature in its fullness. It is this which constitutes them as one God and not simply three members of the species of God. Now here, this problem led Richard of St. Victor, this is really interesting, right, in the 12th century to reject Boethius's. He insists To be truly adequate, it ought to apply to the divine persons as well. He believes, so not only of the definition of personhood be of, right, and here's this importance of the mean proportion, right? To be able to relate to God as person, we must be persons in a way that a definition of some working or real definition of persons can apply to both. And here you get an attempt by Richard St. Victor, a fairly minor correction, defining persons as an individual existence of a rational nature. Now that's interesting. That might not seem like a big deal to you, but when we unpack this word, existentia is the word that he actually uses. It's actually technical, and it reveals something, that the existence of person, when we add this in, right, it does something really amazing. It reveals something. It does not simply refer to a state of being real, but to that which distinguishes a person as, quote, someone who is unique, distinct. Because think about it, an individuated essence of a rational nature that exists, or I.e. is real, is not distinct. It doesn't tell me. And then Aristotle will just be like, well, what makes it unique is that it's these accidental properties, that you have a snub nose and blonde hair or whatever. Like, but that seems terrible to be like, what is at the core of the most important thing is just accidental properties. Something unique, distinct from all others by a particular property. Such distinct being is ultimately received through interactions with others. So the unique property that defines person, not accidental, but something that's importantly essential, and I'm not going to confuse that with essence, but you get what I mean, of defining what a person is, that's distinct from the essence, is the other. That's what it means to be a person. That's what the term existere, that's a Latin, by standing out from, not only expresses the possession of being, obviously it does mean it's real, exists, but also the beings coming from outside. It expresses the fact that one possesses one's being because of someone else. So what makes a person? Another person. You can't be a person defined individually, is what this is shown from the compound verb of the preposition that is added to it. What does existere mean? In fact, if not, sistere, stand ex from someone. That is, what does it mean if not receiving one's own substantial being from someone else? Now you're getting an idea that what person means and how it's defined is from the outside in relation to another person. You can't be a person without another person. This all is going to go into why God's obviously a Trinity. You can't have a Unitarian God that's personal or a person. Because of this. Because person means it derives its definition from another person. Father, Son, right? All right, questions so far? Foot's good. I'm like way far into my healing. Like I was walking without a cane maybe like 3 or 4 weeks ago. I'm fine. Fishing on rivers, but thank you. Yeah, I broke on April 4th, so it was 8 weeks to heal, and then I think it was on cane. I was walking in a walking boot week 8 and 9. I got rid of the cane. And week 11, 12, kind of had a limp for like a week or 2 after that, but I'm well into, no problem. All right, shall we go back? Father Ron, good to see you. I miss you. It was so good to be here with you. As soon as we have enough snow, I will be back. I even got all my skis right there ready to go. Just counting down the days. I'm going to go right back to that cliff and launch it and land it right. All right, well, let's return back. That which a person is, his quality or mode of being. Right? Remember we were talking about the mode of existence. From whence he derives his origin or means to obtain being. It thus can vary with respect to quality, origin, or both. Human beings differ from one another with respect to both. For each human being has both a particular and specific identity, a unique origin. Angels differ with respect to quality only. For each angel is made directly by God, and the persons of the Trinity differ with respect to origin only. Very important. For they share a common nature, however it's constituted. A person's existence is utterly unique and incommunicable. Remember, we say with the Trinity, God shares all things together with the exception of the unique hypostatic properties. That's why they're incommunicable. All things are communicable, idiomatum, except for the hypostatic properties. All right. Now Ratzinger, which was Pope Benedict, he's interesting. He has some interesting stuff to say with this too, because one of the things he obviously knew enough phenomenology, which does particularly well with talking about the notion of persons, and so I think he's using some of that. Persons is, I mean, in other words, persons are defined only in relation to their idea. So there is no single person. It's impossible. Persons imply. And in fact, if you don't think that and you reduce it simply to a rational nature, this is what leads to all the heresies. And Ratzinger says, Arianism and Apollinarianism, first like Christ, had no human soul. Monophysitism denied him his human nature. After these fundamental errors had been rejected, weaker forms of the same tendency made its appearance. Monothelites asserted that although Christ had everything, he at least had no human will, the heart of personal existence. These are all attempts at locating, he's actually right by this, locating the concept of person somewhere in the psychic inventory. Okay? And I talked about this in my workshop with Father Turbo, that Dr. Timothy Patis's critique of modern psychology is it locates all these things what? In psychic inventory. Right? This kind of reducing personhood, because the injury is of the person. Most fundamentally. Even though he has a soul, there's an injury to the soul. It's the person that's affected by this. And so simply reducing and making a psychology that only deals with the rational, that's not what the person is. It's a reduction of personhood to essence and rationality. And we're going to see in terms of therapy how destructive that is. He talks about talk therapy, just kind of locating the person in psychic inventory. And then we see with soldiers with PTSD that actually talk therapy, doing that leads to actually more suicides than any healing. Even Freud himself, right, by seeking the irrational desires of the subconscious, uses what? Reduces personhood to psychic inventory to then move into the subconscious. So all of them, like secular modern psychiatry and therapy, have this problem. And so we see the sort of damage it does in therapy and psychology but theologically it leads to heresy as well. So one of the things, for example, Apollinarianism basically suggested that Christ's human soul, his rational human nature, was replaced by the divine. Why? Well, because they already had erroneous presupposition that person is simply identified with an individual essence of a rational nature. So if that were true, they knew that, well, if he has a human soul, and a rational nature, a human nature, and a divine rational nature, a divine essence, then that would mean there's two persons. So what do the Apollinarians do? They make the mistake from that false presupposition, that error, to go, well, of course he can't have a human soul. Like, it had to be replaced. What do the Monophysites do? Same error. They basically assume that person is reducible to an individual rational essence. Okay, a nature of an individual, right, rationalized. So that's why they're so afraid of saying that there's two natures, physis, after the union in the divine, right? Because what would that imply? There's two persons. So they'll say out of two natures, the Miaphysites, right? Out of two natures, there's only one nature. And they think they preserve, obviously, the the single personhood of Christ. But they're heretics. They're Monophysites, Miaphysites. Why? Because they made a prior error of thinking personhood is simply an individuated, rational essence or nature. So you got, and you can go through Arianism, same with all these mistakes. Monothelites as well, is this confusion between nature and person and reducing it to. That's basically what Ratzinger is saying. The lesson, obviously, Ratzinger is trying to point out, is the concept person ought not to be conceived in a substantialist. And that's really what I thought I brought did I put it away? Oh, it's under a piece of paper. What Metropolitan John Zuzoulas was saying too, I think he calls it, Greek essentialism or something like that, but it's substantialism, right? And so, just like Zuzoulas too, who's familiar with phenomenology and existentialism, it gives him a language of kind of talking about these terms. It removes you from Greek essentialism and substantialism that would lead you to these errors. Ratzinger explains further, it is the nature of spirit to put itself in relation, the capacity to see itself and the other. The spirit is not merely there, it goes back upon itself, as it were. It knows about itself. It constitutes a double existence, which not only is, but knows about itself, has itself. And precisely in this, namely, that it not only is, that's what going back to the real, but it reaches beyond itself. This is what ecstasis means. And Heidegger talks about this too, picking up on the phenomenologist and existentialist language. The Dasein, the being there, is the being who stands outside of themselves. And their being there is defined in relation to the other. It comes and to itself. In transcending itself, it has itself. By being with the other, it first becomes itself. It comes to itself. All right, questions? That was kind of deep. I'm going to try to finish this up in 15 minutes. All of this to explain to you guys why personhood is depends on the other, like the very definition. Didn't I just explain the whole Miaphysites error? Yeah, it made me feel like I'm crazy. I literally just went through. It's because they reduce person to an individuated rational nature, right? That nature fusus, that if you do that, then it would mean after the union of the two natures, you'd have two persons. Well, obviously, we can't have two persons in Christ, so they say only one nature, Miaphysite, after the. Well, that's heretical. Why? Because the error is that they're reducing. There really are two distinct but fully united natures. That's not a problem for us because we don't reduce and define personhood in terms of an individuated rational nature. Okay, let's finish this up and then I'll let you guys go. It's like class. That's what I say to my students. Forgive me. By the way, I want to pull up another existentialist too, who says exactly, he's able to identify this. Man is a spirit, but what is a spirit? This is from Sickness and the Death. I used to have this memorized. Spirit is the self. So here self is, he's identifying as like the person. But what is self? What is the person? The self is a relation. But then he qualifies, it's not actually the relation. It's a relation which relates itself to its own self. How do you do that? Well, here's the phenomenological usage of ecstasis. Exist, right? The being there, the Dasein, who is you, a person, stands outside of yourself. It transcends itself. In order to relate yourself to yourself, you have to be standing outside of yourself, right? And you already have a divine element. To transcend, right, is already divine. And he's going to talk about this. Kierkegaard qualifies, or it is that in the relation, that which accounts for it, that the relation relates itself to its own self. So not only are you transcending, right, you are not the relation, the self is not the relation, but it consists in that fact. I transcend, I'm ecstatic, I'm standing outside, I'm already defined, right, in terms of self and person by that which is outside of me, so that I can understand me and person by the relation of relating, because personhood is relation. That is, the relation relates itself to its own self. And in that, I will find that my ability to do that, that I'm not isolated, that my person then is a relation of these other concepts to the other, i.e. persons. So Kierkegaard concludes, man is a synthesis. Here's the relation that man's relating himself to himself of infinite and the finite. So what did I actually argue? The infinite and finite are incapable of relating because they're opposite categories unless what? Personhood. What is person? The relation that relates itself to itself, and in that relation constitute itself and realize that its definition of, right, ecstasis is defined from outside as defined in terms exactly that personhood, the other person. Is that amazing? And because of that, man can now relate the synthesis, can relate the infinite and the finite. If the necessary conditions for the possibility of knowledge is the infinite God that I can't get to, it's exactly through personhood, not essence, that I'm able to obtain the necessary conditions. Because I am the synthesis of that, right? In my personhood, the infinite, finite, the temporal, and the eternal, the freedom and necessity. Because it does relate to my nature. Nature is of necessity. Personhood is freedom, right? And so I'm relating that. In short, it's a synthesis. It's a synthesis relation between two factors. Then notice, here's even a hat tip to theosis. So regard man is not yet a self. Oh. It's the capacity to become like God. who is a person, right? Who is the full person. And so in relating the sense between the infinite, I'm not there yet, right? I'm acquiring becoming like God. How awesome and mind-blowing is that? Oh, man. Bet you didn't know this was coming in the stream today. Okay, I'm going to try to wrap this up. We've got 8 minutes. Relativity toward the other constitutes the human person. The human person is the event of being of relativity. And he goes into Metropolitan John Zuzulus. Ratzinger actually comments on it. Zuzulus observes the very concept of nature as emerged from the ancient Greek thought leads to closed ontology. I think that's what Zuzulus calls it, ontologism, and critiquing, in that it excludes that a being could become more perfect. Yeah, so notice with ontology, nature, physis, you can't become more. That's what you are. That's what ousia means. Right? And so, closed ontology, necessity, determinism. Freedom is found in, as we're looking at Kierkegaard, personhood. Because persons are not essences. So you can't become more than what you are in essence, but you can in personhood. That a being could be more perfect in its kind by acquiring some characteristics that were not implicit in its nature before. This already rendered the concept of juxtaposition of the two natures in Christ, human and divine, intrinsically problematic. Yeah, we already reviewed that if you had that ontologism, the sort of kind of problems that you would have. To make matters worse, in the Latin West, the problem was amplified in the translated Greek physis as Latin natura. A translation was used as following Heidegger, remember I brought up Heidegger, believes led to a tendency to approach nature as an objectified substance. That's why I brought up in the beginning of this stream, what's person? Well, let's show that they're not. Persons are not object. That's why we say if you objectify a person, what is an object is an essence, an objectified substance. So person can't be that. We already know that. If you just think about the way that you use words and things that you value. So he goes on here, Zuzulus states, a tendency in the West to view the two natures from an angle of the particular qualities and to go to the mystery of salvation with a somewhat overdeveloped interest in what happens to man as man. This has been noted already in Tertullian, and it became quite evident in the case of the Augustinian-Pelagian controversy. Was essentially preoccupied with the question of how much man contributes to salvation. So interesting, even Pelagianism as a mistake is about collapsing personhood into individualized, rationalized nature. Partly for this reason, as well as, no doubt, with his own genius, Augustine contributed to Western thought a tendency to see man, the ego of a psychological complex. This together with, and you already see this too in Distentio Anime, Distentio Mentis, and Augustine, that predates the phenomenological conception of Husserl by 1300 years, 1400, whatever, 1600. I've got to do the math. 1600. So that's a very good aspect of Augustine there. Now, it goes on to state, with the help of cross-fertilization between Boethian and Augustinian approaches to man, our Western philosophy and culture have formed a concept of man out of the combination of the two basic ones, rational individuality on one hand and psychological experience and consciousness on the other. So that's the bad thing, though, is that Augustine not going far enough, and just this, then you get the cross fertilization of, but we're more than just a psychological experience. It was on this basis the combination was that arrived at the conception of person as an individual and or personality, that is, a unit endowed with intellectual, psychological, and moral qualities. Man's distinctive characteristics became in this way identical with his abilities to be conscious of himself and of others, and thus to be autonomous self who intends, thinks, and decides. That's where we get the modern ideal of autonomy. And I think that's why the professors of the bioethics professors that were on were like reluctant to. They want to avoid these because that rights are grounded in that notion of they want to avoid using words of personhood, because the problem is now personhood in the modern sense is just autonomous. And clearly we realize that even children, I mean, nobody in their right mind would give 3-year-olds autonomy. And so because they don't have it, a fortiori, infants and the fetus does not have it, therefore they don't have the right to, that's where they're going. That's why we need to steer away from that. We can make an argument for the life of the fetus apart from that was the argument. So I'm not going to go in with it's right like the best tactic or something. I'm just saying it was brought up because of this ideal of autonomy. Like Ratzius, Zizou sees the answer as lying in a more relational concept of personhood. This, in turn, he interprets in the terms of ecstasis, standing apart from the self. We already saw that, right? Obviously, it's Heidegger. It's in the very word itself, which was Heidegger was so good at exploring the etymology of the words, tracing it back to the history of the Greeks and what happened. But also, you see that was pointed out with Kierkegaard's definition. That Dionysian, the Areopagite, in his discussion of divine eros attributed to God. Being a person is basically different from being an individual or personality, in that the person cannot be conceived in itself as a static entity. What did I just say? There is no personal monad. You can't have a strict Unitarian person, but only as it relates to. So God eternally relates to. Then he relates to something. Thus, person implies openness of being. And here's the freedom. This is exactly why I say that God is not constrained by anything. And even more, that the ecstasis of being, that is a movement toward communion, which leads to a transcendence of the boundaries of the self and thus to freedom. At the same time, in contrast to the partiality of individual, which is subject to addition and combination, the person in its ecstatic character reveals its being Catholic, kataholos, that is integral, undivided. So the Trinity is basically saying is grounds and is Catholic. It's a whole, right? And it's only triad, right? Because the monad and dyad are opposed. How can you be one and undivided yet distinct? By being triad. That's exactly what person transcends the dialectical oppositions of the Greeks and ontologism. And thus, in its being ecstatic, becomes hypostatic person. That is the bearer of its nature in its totality. I think it's a great place to end. That shows and proves why God's a Trinity, why personhood is necessary, and personhood implies communion. Find this too in the book by Metropolitan John Zul's Being and Communion. Your very being, a person is defined per relation to the other, just like father and son, and that obviously monad and dyad are impossible to reconcile. So personality must be grounded in triad. God is therefore a trinity, and therefore trinity is a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge. QED. Quod erat demonstratum. How about that? That's exactly how you refute the modalist. The modalist confuses. It's always the same area. The personhood is reducible to a rational individual essence in that particular mode. So they have the same. That's how you refute them. And furthermore, yeah, well, that's. Like I said, that goes through every single error. Like that's why I believe it was Saint Basil said, or was it Saint Gregory? I can't remember now. My saints confused. The root of every heresy is a confusion in nature and person. So, God bless you guys. Great stream. Let me just see if there's any other super chats. I don't want to miss anybody. Austin donates $10. Before you go, I bought the Intro to Philosophy course yesterday, but I saw the description of the class enrollment had ended. No, that's okay. I added you. Did you see that? Let me look on. You should have got an email. I added you to the course. I mean, if there was some announcement that I made somewhere that it ended or something like that, I just forgot to right now we're currently doing an epistemology course, but I built I'm there with you. I added you to the course. It says you're pending, so it means you got an email. You need to accept that, and then you have access to the course. I created an introduction video yesterday to how to navigate the canvas and stuff like that. If you might check your spam mail if it didn't go through, and then basically what we're doing is we do office hours, and it's never an hour. We must have went 4 hours yesterday. It was awesome. From the various streams, the various classes that I do, you get to come in. Right now, everybody's voted on Monday nights. We just go with what works for the majority of people. 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Monday night. You can come in. We talk about all kinds of different. It doesn't just have to be epistemology, philosophy. We even did a review of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Dr. Elise, the philosophy of physics that schooled him. We watched that. We did we actually covered a lot of this too. So you once you add the course, respond to you can see all the announcements, go through, navigate. We'll start your first week here. I don't know if you're going to do the week by week or go at your own pace, but just because a previous Intro to Philosophy ended doesn't mean that you can't actually join in. I'll be there. So yeah, just add it, and then you can reach out. Send me emails if you have any questions about. But yeah, I got it all set up for you yesterday because I saw that you'd purchased that. So you are good to go. Thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you for purchasing the course. Again, anybody else can add at any time any of the courses, the Canvas University courses. Don't forget, too, that you can talk to your chair and dean if you're at college. And a lot of them have been accepting this course because it is taught at an accredited college by a PhD in philosophy, and I have the syllabus that I usually send to them, and many of them actually accepted that for transferable. So I'm not saying every chair or dean would do that, but we've had some that actually do that because I'm currently teaching these at an accredited college. The syllabus, everything you get is a real university education for as cheap as possible. Plus, I mean, the office hours, talk to anybody on here that are in the office hours. The office hours themselves are so awesome and so much. Like I said, I promise at least once a week, an hour a week, but we do like 3, 4 hours. Like, we have a blast. And so that itself, even if you didn't get the rest of the stuff, is worth it. Don't take my word for it. Ask the satisfied customers of Patristic Faith Canvas University courses. But thank you so much. Orthodox Library of Ideas, thank you. Thank you for joining the morning prayers. Today the temperature is down. It was like it was like 100 or something yesterday. Now it's rainy, overcast, and 55 degrees. Thank you, Father Ron. Good to see you here. It was a blessing to be with you and your wife. And my love and prayers to Father Ron, but to all of you. And I guess Jim Bob is waiting for you to troll his... No, did I say troll? Waiting for you to attentively watch his stream. So God bless you guys. Until next time, may God keep you and preserve you. Amen.